20th.
17, so this is 22.
So the 2015 said it was the 20th.
So we're 4 years later, 24.
24.
Yeah.
Okay. 24.
So the,
Assuming that's right.
right. So it's a lost,
Here it is.
as my father likes to say, the vagaries of time. But we started this idea of doing this webinar with the Sage Person of the Year, this year Persons of the Year, to give people a chance to have a better understanding of kind of the background, where people came from. And in your case, because of this longevity in the industry across different fields and different types of product, what you've seen, where we've been, and where you think we might be going. So we're gonna do some talking about you and how you got here. I should back up and say that I'm Annie Gerard. I'm on the board of the Council on Sage, and I have the distinction of being one of the founders of this council when it was founded 30-something years ago. And I had sat on the board for 28 or so of those 30-something years. So I'm the institutional memory of the Council on Sage.
Are you the last person standing?
I am. Although there are a lot of people who long-standing members of the board, because it started as a way to, when it was sort of in the early days of seniors housing, and it was a chance to network and to learn.
Yeah.
So there's always been a big focus on education, and the Sage Awards was started to honor people who had made contributions to the seniors living in Southern California, as well as kind of the industry as a whole. The kind of education and understanding of this, rather intricate industry that we're all in. So, Eric Davidson, Brian Florness, the Sage Persons of the Year. We believe it's Sage 24, although it's been such a long time that the vagaries of age, no one's quite sure what it is. So, but you're in a very celebrated company. There's a lot of people who've been honored as Sage Persons, and really a who's who of people in the seniors housing industry in Southern California. You guys, one of the things that we liked, in addition to your own stellar accomplishments, all of these connections and tie-ins with past Sage winners of the year. Eric's father, for example, who was a Sage, I think in 2005. Vicki Clark, who was the first president of Vintage, the company that you guys built and sold, was the Sage winner. And you worked for two Sage winners, Mike Costa and John Husky. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but let's start. You guys are the co-presidents of Vintage Senior Housing, which you built up from co-founders of Vintage. And you built this up from a relatively small company to a huge company that you sold a couple of years ago for a ridiculous amount of money. So tell us kind of how Vintage...
In a nutshell.
What is Vintage? How did you, what did you do? What are you known for? And kind of tell us the Vintage story.
Vintage really began in about a 20-minute conversation between Eric and I in the offices of ARV, out of adversity, really, because ARV was going through transition, and we created an off-balance sheet financing mechanism for ARV to develop and renovate senior living properties. And it was really because they were pursuing a path and didn't like the terms that they were being presented. And we looked at each other and said, well, we can do that. Mm-hmm. And had we not, development and acquisition at ARV was going to end. So a door opened and we immediately jumped through. And it was a tough year to get it going. It was $102 million financing, and back in, what was it?
97, 98.
97, 98, that was a fairly large transaction. We had support of the ARV board, which was helpful, and we had a great track record for the financial markets to believe in us. So, I don't know, anything you want to add to how we?
Yeah, as Brian said, we
this door opened and we were dumb enough to run through it.
Yes.
And we said, okay, we can start a development company and be a developer for ARV, our original partner, and maybe this will grow into a business and be developers for other people that were operators of senior housing
Right.
communities.
Well, this was fairly early in your career, so how did you get to ARV, which, back long time ago was known as American Retirement Villas, one of the, premier assisted living and independent living developers and operators in the country, and subsequently sold to Atria, I think? Something, I don't know.
It merged with Atria and through a combination put together by Lazard Frere.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you what was your start in senior housing?
Well, you started when you were born.
Well, my father started American ARV in the late 70s, I think. But my dad had been developing on and off. They didn't call them assisted living, they called them retirement hotels
Right.
originally,
Right?
back in the 60s.
And then congregate care
And congregate
eventually.
care, and then assisted living probably didn't really become until really the 80s.
Right.
And so out of college, I went to work in commercial real estate, and at the end of my commercial real estate career, I was doing doing some acquisitions for ARV and some financings, and eventually ARV decided they were going to be more active in the development side and maybe the acquisition side, although they really weren't thinking that far in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to work as a project manager at ARV in 1993, I think it was.
Yeah.
And Brian was already there.
Okay, so Eric, you were born into it. Brian, what brought you to senior housing? Was it intentional or was it something that just
No,
happened?
it was a complete and utter fluke. I wanted to get into real estate development. This is late 80s. And I picked up a Builder 100. And I went through and I looked at firms that were in Los Angeles. And there's a picture of John Husky. And it's CalMark Development Corp. And they were 13th in the nation in housing starts, which was, I don't know if that was true or not. But that doesn't
Good
matter.
propaganda.
And I happened to know somebody at CalMark in the accounting side, and I got an interview with Chris Skiff
Wow.
in the senior apartment division. Mike was running it, and John was running the overall development corp. And I got hired in November of 1988, and I worked for Kevin Payne and Frank Cardone and Mike, and ultimately John.
It's really something because CalMark was the training ground for a lot of the people who are still very active in different types of senior and 55 plus housing. I mean, all of those guys went on to work for or start up development companies, as did you. So it was it's really a training ground.
Everything transitioned 90-91, and John and Mike jumped out of CalMark and started Urban Housing Systems, Inc. And I was lucky enough one day to get a phone call. I think this was the beginning of 92. And within 6 months, we were down at ARV because of the senior apartment aspect that John and Mike had. And ARV was starting to look at senior apartments as an adjunct to assisted living, tax credit financing, so forth, and those guys had all the bond financing experience. So it was a natural transition, and all of a sudden I find myself driving from LA to Orange County. What am I doing? In ARV at the time, in 92, I remember there was one of these magazines. They were the largest assisted living operator with 28 communities in the nation.
Yeah, no, that doesn't surprise me at all. They were really pioneering and truly a marquee assisted living company, and then of course brought you in to do this sort of the affordable housing piece of it. So we're straddling both sides. So from ARV to this, this 20-minute conversation and this door that opened to start up Vintage, what was your intention? What was your mission at Vintage, and what were you going to do, and what did you do?
Well, our intention was to develop, because that's finance, develop, acquire, work with other operating companies, and it was maybe a year and a half into Vintage. We're looked at each other, we're not going to make it, we need to start operating. And we immediately thought of Vicky. So in 2000, we acquired our first community and started operating.
So founded in 1998 and the first community acquired and operating in 2000.
Correct.
And then what? Because this was, I mean, the arc of vintage is really a remarkable arc.
Well, so our partnership with ARV was dwindling. In the kind of started, the beginning of the end was probably in 2000, and it took a few more years to get out of that partnership for that to wrap up. But in the meantime, we acquired 7 or 8 communities between
I think 8.
2000 and 2006, all syndicated, raised capital, probably raised $10-15 million, from friends and family.
Some institutions.
A little bit of institutional money.
And all assisted living communities.
All assisted
Okay.
living and memory care.
Right,
at the time,
okay.
Yeah. And then we had a small little corporate office, and Vicki was the president of our management company, and then we were in the right place at the right time and met CalSTRS, California State Teachers Pension Fund, and they were looking to make an investment in the senior housing field, and in 2005 we negotiated a joint venture with them, and we closed our first acquisition with them in 2006 in Cerritos.
Mhm.
And from 2006 to 2014 maybe was our last
Acquisition. That's right. It was Grandview right before we sold, a year before we sold.
Right.
So we kind of continued to acquire as we went, but CalSTR's original strategy was they wanted a small local independent operator. We fit that. They liked our institutional knowledge within the industry, the fact that we were with a company that had gone public, the fact that we had experience developing, acquiring across the nation. And then they also wanted a big public company relationship as well. And they called Sunrise many times and they never got a call back. So, I think we raised $75 million, and within 6 months we were going back for the next $150 million. And this was 2006, 2007. So we were buying right at the height of the market, going into the recession. And we operated through the recession, which was tricky for everybody, but we learned a lot. And again, I think as a company, we always tended to do better when the market wasn't, because when we were starting, it opened doors for us to acquire assets that other companies were sitting on the sideline, but it allowed us to work with local financing and different investors and kind of get a chance to tell our story and buy buildings that we otherwise wouldn't be able to buy. So.
Do you have a favorite project of the ones that you acquired and developed over the years? Is there one that stands out?
I think Burbank was pretty cool.
Burbank was cool. Yeah, I mean, from a development renovation standpoint, I think, there's a few buildings I put a little bit of my soul into. It's hard not to spend that much time trying to create something and not feel like you've left your mark on it.
Right.
But
So what was cool about Burbank?
What was it? It was a 1970s retirement, kind of a B- retirement building in Burbank, and we bought it empty basically, and did took it down to the studs, so to speak, renovation, and then did kind of an Art Deco kind of design, and it just turned out, it went from a B- to an A+, and then was very successful in the community, and was a place you could be proud of, as an owner and an operator.
one of the things, it was a concrete building, so it had an I occupancy. And that really was different for us. We were basically 2 to 3 story stick frames. So you have all the fire doors, typically, so your dining room's closed up, And in Burbank, we were able to just open things up. So as you went through those hallways, you really got a sense of space and how that interplayed with one another. And that's not something you can typically accomplish in stick frame building.
So it stood out because of that. I mean, it was a transformation.
Yes.
From a B- to an A+.
Yeah.
So that's
It was a mid-rise or high-rise building eight stories. Yeah.
Mhm.
Beautiful views of the San Gabriel Mountains, and it was just a unique property for us, quite unique.
So by the time the end, sort of when Vintage came to the point where you decided that you were going to sell the company, how did that come about? Because that was just a couple of years ago.
Another door.
Another 20-minute conversation.
I think we were just going through a little bit of a transition. We had amassed, and the thing that I think we did well is we kept acquiring or developing properties that were accretive to the portfolio from a real estate standpoint. Irreplaceable locations, irreplaceable markets, not all of them, but the majority of them, and that really kind of set us aside from kind of the rest of the market. Now, there's a lot of other assets out there, but they had already basically been consolidated with the big public REITs. So I think we were at one of the conferences, it might have been an ASHA conference down at Dana Point. Cap rates were going sub 6, getting close to 5%. Eric and I looked at each other and said, it's time. I think we also came to the realization that from running the company, what got us there and got us to Vintage, we did a really good job. Where Vintage needed to go, it was probably outside of both of us from an operating standpoint.
The business had gotten, from being entrepreneurial, it had become institutional. And it was either get bigger and hire a institutional CEO, COO, hire a general counsel lawyer to handle doing business in the pleasant state of California. And it was just it was get bigger to get out, basically.
Yeah.
And I don't think either one of us had much of a desire to get bigger. And so it was kind of
and it kind of lost some of the fun that we had in the early days in growing the company. I think that was probably some of my favorite times, and a little bit of a lesson of careful what you wish for. And here, very, very grateful for what we accomplished, but there was a lot going on at the end. And we started the sale process the very beginning of 2015. We went to the market middle of the year. We basically had a draft contract, and there was that one Thursday in August of 2015 where China took the markets down 20%, and the public REITs just tore up their contract and said, we can't buy you. So we bounced around for a little bit, talking to different private equity, international money, so forth, and then the public REITs came back in 2016 and we transacted. So that was a journey unto itself.
Right. You took a lot to get to that point.
A lot of bouncing up and down. Emotionally, yeah.
So both you guys have, 25, 30 years in this business? You started what?
88.
All right, so that's 30, right?
Yeah.
Or 30, 88, 98, 2000, that's 40, 30.
30.
30. 30. So what kind of changes have you seen? What are the most kind of profound shifts in any way, in terms of what the residents' expectation is, in terms of the regulations, in terms of the kind of product that's being built and developed, in terms of where it's being built and developed, or operations, anything? What are the biggest shifts you've seen in 30 years?
Well, in the assisted living memory care field, which is really what we did, I think the biggest shift is demographic. The average age, the average condition of our resident from our days at ARV, in the mid 90s, the average person was around 80 years old. They were fairly healthy.
Mm-hmm.
They probably were still driving. By 2005, the average person was 85, 86. They were fairly unhealthy. They weren't driving. They were probably getting assistance with 4 to 5 activities of daily living, and that trending continues. I think it's worse or better. It's different today than it was 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the recession drove a lot of that. You know,
Yes.
there was some lifestyle choices. People would move into seniors housing, assisted living, congregate care,
Right.
because they didn't want to take care of their garden anymore. They wanted someone to cook for them. Now people only move in because they need the care. They absolutely need it.
So part of what split that off then was this rise of independent living, you know, where it's assisted living light, you know, you're not getting the help with the hands-on services, you may have fewer than 3 meals a day. So there's some services, but it's at a much lower level. I mean, has that changed kind of who's in assisted living versus other kinds of housing?
I don't think in our markets, I don't think we really saw that much competition from the independent congregates. I mean, prior to the recession, you know, I think assisted living kind of offered that. In the recession, everything changed. We got much higher acuity, and it was really board and cares and home health care that started to absorb a lot of our market share that we didn't really see before from the recession.
So that was a price issue. I mean, that it was
Definitely a price
so
issue.
expensive, and
It was economics more than
So
anything.
people would not move to assisted living unless they had to. They needed that assistance.
They could not afford to stay at home anymore.
Right.
And that's the biggest competition for assisted living memory care today is, I mean, the advertisements for home health care companies are ubiquitous now.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't exist 10 years ago.
Right.
But now there's all the, you know, stay-at-home programs for.
There's a lot of alternatives.
That's probably the biggest competition.
And technology has changed to allow a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
an assisted living project that was built 25 or 30, let's say 25 years ago, even 20 years ago, versus one that would be built today, how does that look different today? Are there more units or less units? Are they bigger, are they smaller? You know, how's it different?
Depends a lot on the market you're in. I think Southern California is a relatively unique market in that there still are a lot of fairly well-off seniors compared to some other some other places. So there's a fair number of, I would say, luxury senior housing projects that look pretty similar to the luxury senior housing projects of 30 years ago. The units are probably bigger. You know, there are more 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms than there are studios. They might have a restaurant and a couple cafes instead of just a dining room. I mean, so the amenities are changed, but the casual observer would walk in and they look pretty much the same. And that I think can succeed in some markets in Southern California or similar to that. In less affluent areas, you're gonna how are people going to be able to afford assisted living? And so you're gonna probably see a much more institutional, generic product being built in the future, I would think. Or they're gonna figure out some other ways. The biggest challenge is how are baby boomers gonna afford these services?
Right.
Whether they're at home or they're in an institutional, in a facility, how are they gonna pay for it?
Right. But it's,
Rents are gonna be $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month.
10,000.
Well, I think that, there's developers are kind of looking at that less care intensive end of the side of the continuum. So that, this idea of independent living light, for example, or even beefed up senior apartments, market rate senior apartments that are restricted to people who are 55 and over, but they're adding in an overlay of services. So you'll have a continental breakfast and you'll have scheduled transportation and, concierge, probably a wellness program, because that's a big deal. So there's just a lot of kind of new types of product that are emerging. Where do you see things going? If you were new, gonna start a new company, do something new today in the senior housing business, what would that look like?
Yeah, I've seen the opportunity for the last 5 years. I think, we were going after the highest level socioeconomic, and I do think we've missed all those 75-plus-year-old seniors, and I think it's senior apartments. I think what's the opportunity that I see is really a technology platform, is you have all these fragmented services in these markets. I mean, you could go across the United States, put up 400 of these, but what's going to differentiate you? It's really bringing those services that in that local market, so you're not having to develop the platforms to offer those services, but allowing the community to become part of that. There's great marketing unto itself, and joining the family member in that as well. The technology has the ability to do that. So, Mrs. Jones needs her apartment cleaned, she needs a ride to the doctors. There's some new activity out there that they can then bring to the common area. They need, local meal service every once in a while. All those services are sitting there. It's just how do you get them to the seniors?
You need to piggyback off the existing stuff rather than creating it unique to that community.
I think it's hard to try and own all the service components up and down the line and say, we're going to do this for you. We're a one-stop shop. I mean, I think you have to look at and realize, what are you going to fail at? You can't be everything to everybody. So what's going to be the niche of your marketplace? And I think, for me, it'd be the technology side.
Yeah.
We can connect you in the community so that you can age in place more so than going to a multifamily unit.
Now, aging in place, remember John Husky, your old boss, he told us years ago that we needed to change our thinking about aging in place. We needed to think in terms of living in place.
I'm aging in place.
We are all aging in place.
Right.
Are there developers who are doing something that you think is good? I mean, who do you admire out there? Anybody who's doing, you think is more innovative or doing a better job than someone else?
I stepped out of senior housing 3 years ago and I haven't looked back.
I mean, there were those guys in San Francisco that were kind of heading in that way, but they just, I can't remember the name of the
I
company.
think there's a bunch of,
People are trying, but
everyone has
I've not heard of anybody
Yeah.
that's kind of broken the mold.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has an operating thesis, and there's 20 ways to do it right, and there's probably 5 to do it wrong. And I think, all those companies, whether it's size or amenities or whatever it is, or what you're gonna offer versus not, and you gotta believe in it and go out and provide it. And the ones we've seen do that, the companies that we competed against were highly successful, even though there was differences in our operating philosophies.
Well, and the market's getting so much bigger, we're in the early days yet. I mean, the baby boom hasn't even hit the age that's the logical candidates for assisted living. So what's happening now, that influx for the senior apartments that you're talking about is because the front edge of the baby boomers, the people who are born in 1946 who are 73 now, they're squarely in the sights of the 55 plus apartments. They're not assisted living candidates because of course they don't need that service, and they're certainly not going to pay the rate that it costs to provide those kinds of services.
A lot of them probably can't.
Right, well, there is that too. Now,
So is there a way in the senior apartment, I mean, when we were doing senior apartments and assisted living at the same time, we always thought there'd be a synergy between, you can rent an apartment at 75 and at 85 you're gonna move into assisted living.
Mhm.
But all the 75-year-olds that were renting apartments couldn't afford assisted living.
Right,
That's why they were in the apartment in the first place.
right.
They didn't have a home to sell to capitalize that, so.
See, and that's changed now because the market rate apartments are about half of their residents are moved out
Right.
from a home buyer.
Right.
So,
I think that the
mismatch-
demographics are changing rapidly, and so in that senior apartment environment, can you have a product that agglomerates all the services from assisted living healthcare services down to meal service or janitorial service, housekeeping, that can be provided to an apartment resident in a cost-effective manner
Right.
and legally from a regulatory manner.
Yeah, that's going to be the interesting part is, how do you move somebody that's too acute or too mentally unstable in a senior apartment?
They're worried, they're dealing with that already.
I bet
It's
they
an
are.
issue, and it becomes an issue on the front end too,
Sure.
of the person who comes to move in, and that leasing people have to be really cognizant that, this person needs more assistance, they have more, they have more ADLs, and they should not be in this senior apartment community. It's very enticing for particularly the adult children of, mom who's 83, let's say she's living in kind of a luxury independent living like the stuff that Wolf is building, Revel. So she's paying a lot of money and living in Revel, and if Greystar opens their Overture luxury apartment brands in that same market, that rent delta is like $2,000. So no meals other than continental breakfast. You're not getting everything obviously in a Greystar 55 plus apartment. You would be in that, the cruise ship model of independent living. But that delta of $2,000, I think the kids in particular are saying that buys a lot of Uber Eats.
Yeah, exactly.
We can figure out how to patch together at least the meal portion of it. So it's fascinating to me. I've been in the industry. I'm older than you guys are, so I've actually been in this industry. Well, let's see. I did my first senior housing study in 1985. So contemporaneous with what you're doing. So what? So there's going to be. There are going to be these shifts and changes and so on. And you're toying around. What have you done in the post-vintage era? Eric, you're obviously wearing your logo. So tell us about what you're doing now.
I was retired for about a month. A very good friend of mine is a ex-professional tennis player. He's the coach of the Orange County Breakers, which is a World Team Tennis franchise. World Team Tennis was founded by Billie Jean King and her husband, and my dad was involved a little bit in 1973-74. Anyway, my friend called me. He said, "I'm the coach of the Breakers, and the owner would like to sell the team. Do you have any interest in buying a tennis team?" And I said, "Nope, no interest at all. I'm retired. I'm gonna just hang for a while and figure things out." And he goes, "Will you talk to the guy?" Okay, I'll talk to the guy. Well, 3 months later, I bought a tennis team. And we won the championship my first year, which is all due to ownership. It has nothing to do with players or coaching. And then Billie Jean King sold most of her ownership of the league to two individuals, and those two guys didn't really get along, and so I partnered up with one of them and bought out the other one. So I now own half of World Team Tennis. I'm chairman of the board of World Team Tennis. And we're trying to get back to the glory days of the 80s in the tennis world. And we had a good start this year. We added 2 new teams, and we were on CBS TV, and it's been
Congratulations.
It's been a fun run. Hopefully we can make some money at it.
That's the hope.
Brian, what are you doing in the post-vintage
I'm unemployed,
era?
unemployed and unemployable. I took on the task of kind of shutting down the operating company. We sold assets. So, we had 2,000 employees, and there's just been a myriad.
2,000
We had
employees?
2,000 employees. So there's just been a myriad of different things to wrap up. We have 40 LLCs. There's all the final tax returns and terminations, and you go to the mailbox and it's this high of stuff. And I just walk the beach with my dog Larry and figure out the next move. I've looked at some managed care opportunities in more of the healthcare space, kind of bringing a little bit of my perspective from assisted living operations, and the fact that Medicare is starting to look at reimbursing some of those services, and I know there's people trying to figure it out. It's just very complex.
So you're open to the idea of doing something else kind of in the senior housing business or related business. You're not necessarily gonna buy a tennis team and
No. I might work on my bottom turn, surfing a little bit, but no, it'd be great to be part of something with individuals that, are doing some great work. I think that's the part about senior living as a career. We've had incredible success, but it also has significance in the world, and that's kind of hard to find in a lot of different career paths. I think that's what separates senior living, some other careers as well, apart from just, different housing development. But I certainly don't want to carry all the buckets,
Right.
and I certainly don't want a title.
Or 2,000 employees.
Or 2,000 employees in California.
Well, it's a wonderful story, and it's, as I said at the beginning, these interconnections with the other Sage Person of the Years is really fun. That this is what's happening in this industry as a whole. I think there are a lot of connections, and one of the reasons when this council was formed back in 1990, I think, the intent was, we did feel like pioneers. There was a lot to be learned and to share with each other, and the council's focus has always been on education and that sharing of information, because this is a really dynamic industry, and I think it is the people are very forthcoming. We have people who attend our regular breakfast meetings who often comment how open the speakers are, that they're sharing what they've
Very
seen and what they've
collaborative.
learned. It's very
The industry, I
collaborative.
think, is, yeah.
So any parting words in terms of someone who's interested in getting into seniors housing, or things to think about, or reasons to get involved in this, or anything else?
Well, it's funny, both my daughters got married last year, so it was an interesting year, big year. But one of my son-in-laws, Corbin, is in the commercial real estate field right now, and he wants to transition to something else. And one of the things, he's 30 years old, 31 years old. One of the things he expressed interest in seniors housing. And he goes, "Can you help me out?" I go, "I've been out of it for a while." I'll give you any, whatever advice is, whatever that's worth. And it's like, I said, well, you have to, first off, you have to decide you want to be on the operating side. You want to, and then I think then you would go get a job and be a general manager at a building and executive director or whatever, and learn it from the ground up. Or do you want to be on the asset management real estate side? Because it's still going to be the biggest cost of the senior living, the senior housing industry is the capital cost, the building itself, buildings themselves. And he's more a real estate guy, so he said the real estate side. So I'm kind of like, okay, well then I think you should go talk to the people who are doing the most deals right now.
Mm-hmm.
So who are the REITs, the private equity guys who are buying, building senior living properties most actively. Go talk to those guys and see what they need.
So he needs to look at the list of the top 100, right?
Open up that magazine.
Exactly.
Top 100. There's a top 50 every year by
Right.
ASHA.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So words of wisdom, some sage advice for anyone who wants to get into this business or who's already in this business.
I think you can, I only know senior living. It's been an incredible opportunity and career. I don't think you can find anything that doesn't have, greater associates, incredible people to work with, and opportunity, because it is always going to change. It's going to be a demanding market. So, you just got to get your foot in the door, find that door that's open, jump through, and whether you're on the operating side, finance side, whatever it is, you can find your path along the way.
So lots of opportunity. Well, I think that's a perfect way to end things. And people will be able to come and hear more about people talking about you, and you guys talking a little bit more about yourself at the Sage Award ceremony, which is
November.
November. Do we know the date? We don't know what year it is.
21st,
We don't
I
know what date.
21st.
November
21st.
21st. And all the information will be on the Council on Sage website, so people can track it that way. So perfect. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, really interesting, and we will make it available for other people to be able to hear it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
a lot.
you.
I appreciate
Thank you
it.
very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.
That's a
Cut.
wrap.
And we can add it if we want to.
Now it's time good. We
spent
about 36 minutes.
Okay,
Now I gotta find
that's
that
what I wanted.
passage.
It was on one of the
I
emails.
sent
It's
an
on the
email
email,
to you
yeah.
early on.
Yes.
I used to know them by heart. So
Let's see.
Victor Revere was first.
I
Husky,
kinda,
I
I
think,
think,
was
I'm pretty sure I went to the first one.
That was Victor Revere, because that would have
I'm
been.
sure I went to Huskies and
Husky
Mike's.
was, what year was Husky? Oh my God, yes, Husky was 96, so he was second.
So 95,
This
so that's
is
that way,
95,
yeah, okay.
absolutely, you were right. It was
Okay.
95 was the first year of Sage. And then Mike was 2000, so in between him, I think Marilyn Diddy was an early Sage.
Could have been, yeah.
Yeah, that
Um,
sounds familiar. Oh, and what's his name, the Huntington Beach guy?
Oh, yeah,
Simon.
Delma Pacifica,
Yeah,
Grave.
yeah, he was an early guy, right?
He was an early guy, in fact, you know, he had a, like
He was a character,
he
oh my
was a
God.
character. He had a credential for skilled nursing,
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah.
And his number was like
And then what we do.
yeah.
Let me go here, and it's gonna tell us, and me, everybody,
Yes. Paul
and then it's
Brazil
gonna
is
ask to
still alive.
record, it's gonna tell us
I
to
don't
like
know.
produce
I
the
haven't, he used to
fabulous
call
recording.
me, I mean, I,
What did I miss?
over the
Did you
years,
learn all
the
kinds
guy
of
who developed
wacky
San
things?
Clemente Villas,
This one's still running.
he's
but
80, guys,
October.
my dad's 85, just turned
No, it's very
85, he's got a
Jump on
job.
in.
No, it's okay, it's okay.
And he used to call me every
Oh,
month,
you don't want to.
wanting to get help, advice on something.
No,
He's like, not really.
Hey, but
This is when
I,
you
Paul
get the really
Brazil,
good
Keep
stuff.
it going. He's
I
married.
think you're right,
His wife-
actually.
What's her name?
Yeah.
I know her.
yeah,
Ah,
and she,
Yeah.
He's 80?
See?
Yeah, I
Oh,
just
he's
always
gotta be
figured
90 now.
today's world.
or close,
She's
I just
oh,
figured
she's
I'm
like
younger
much,
now
much,
somewhere.
she's in her,
Yeah,
I would say
yeah,
she's
it's
in
always
her
on.
50s
I
now.
would say that also. She's
I mean,
like,
there's a guy, you know, nobody should have financed him to build that deal, but he did a great job, and they run it well.
well, interesting, you know, you look at people who are new to this business, and in some cases, I mean, some of them absolutely stub their toes. They get into this business and find that this is much harder than
I
they
mean,
thought.
everyone can't do it?
No, not everyone can do it. But then you look at the nexuses of the world, you know, that they developed their Vivante, which was a Sage Project of the Year winner a few years ago, in this, you know, decidedly funky location.
That's
Home
being,
run.
that's being nice, yeah.
Home run,
Which one is that one?
Vivante on the coast.
In Costa Mesa.
It's in
Yeah.
Costa Mesa.
Industrial
Just
area,
that one,
yeah.
we sat there and said, because it was always our mantra out of ARV, would you drop your mom off there? Not only from a
Right.
location, but real estate, everything else, and we had like.
Depends if you like her.
They
or
did.
not.
That's true.
They did it, but they filled up quickly. They
Yeah.
built a second phase.
Doing it.
Jeff
yeah.
Butcher's mom lives there.
I know a ton of
Yeah.
people.
Well, it
that
really
live there.
comes down to, like, some people just have a really limited budget.
Yeah. Well, no, this is
No,
a
it's
very
a high end, it's the
No,
most
this is
expensive
a-
place around.
It's a
yeah.
very
And you would
expensive.
you wouldn't drive your mom off there?
It's a very industrial
If
area.
you're driving by bad mobile
Yeah.
home parks
Yeah.
and industrial buildings.
Yeah.
It's a part of Costa
Car
Mesa that you go to
shops,
get your
Yeah, yeah,
car work
it's
on.
very industrial.
Oh, yeah, I know.
It's just
yeah.
a
So
fun-
it's
it's
West
a-
Coast way.
Yeah, it's a really funky.
No,
But the
my-
only
my
thing is, it's
dad
right
is-
across from Cardinal Hall.
Cardinal Hall.
Cardinal, right.
Yeah.
And it's,
And it's changing, you know,
well,
that
it's-
part
it-
of
it's-
Costa
That
it's
Mesa.
whole
the
area
only,
is
uh,
gentrifying.
Yeah,
it's,
Right.
it's,
there's your
it-
list.
it's so
Okay.
much nicer than the competition.
You gotta go.
But
Damn.
we own the new, two Newport
reverse order.
building,
Husky
yeah,
was
because
two,
it's
St.
Newport.
Grey was three,
And
Maryland
if
City
you
was
think about that
4,
area, I mean, think about this person who's
Costa,
probably
JB,
77 to
Eddie
85.
Colbert.
I mean, Costa Mesa wasn't great
It was
7 years ago. I mean,
2002.
20
Yeah.
years ago. I mean, it's pretty nice.
I'm gonna
compared to
introduce
that.
Corbin to Andy, just for fun.
Bill Whitty and
Yeah.
related.
Bill
I mean, we
Yeah.
took
Yeah.
my
My
dad.
dad
Vicky
was
was
looking at that property, my mom and I did a U-turn.
Carl Irwin in
because of the
2007,
outer
Sue
perimeter,
Farrow
but then they
in
did wind up
2008,
going and
Benny
making an appointment,
Gonzalez
and
in
once you got
2009,
inside,
me
Oh,
in
yeah.
you didn't see
2010,
that
Graham in 2011, Lauren
Yeah.
Shook,
It's a pretty
Yeah.
nice project.
2012,
Is that
2013
Yeah.
was Paul Johnson and the Rancho Mission Viejo.
Oh,
And it's,
right,
it's a
right.
great, it
Yeah.
really is a great location.
2014
You're
was Laura
right next to the beach.
Archuleta, who heads up
I
Jamboree.
mean, you're very close.
Oh, right,
Nonprofit
right,
and builds.
right.
That's
Be
the
a
part
little
that I
windy
love.
on that bluff area.
Wayne
though.
Sant,
I like
2015.
that.
Wayne.
So I
Now
like the breeze
Oakmont,
and
Yeah,
that.
degrees.
2016, John Martin.
So I'm gonna save this recording.
I mean, he's in his
I'll
80s,
shoot it to
too.
Andy or whoever
He has great
wants the
hair.
recording. We can edit it
It
any
just
way you
looks
guys want.
fantastic.
I think
It'll probably take about 30
I
minutes.
think he said he'd help us with that.
Yeah.
And he's been,
For
he works
Sage.
at Irvine
Yeah,
Company.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then he'll be the, like, the pro
Mitch
here,
Brown?
really.
Has his final goodbye at
And-
Kisco.
and literally-
Oh, really?
Kisco.
As all
Oh,
of this
he-
kind of goes
He went
through,
over, he went
worst
over
case, we
to,
could always do some imagery with voiceover
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
too.
heading
You
out.
know, whatever.
Mixing it
That's
up.
why it was like.
Our last one was
Good for him.
Yeah.
over to meetings.
We were
Yeah.
So he is there
Yeah,
now.
and
So there you go.
I was like, Mitch.
Annie has
Yeah.
access to box.
It is a
Good,
it's
so we can do
small
a little
world.
editing, because I actually sort of launched in and realized I haven't even said who this is, who I am, who
You
they
did a
are.
great job.
You did a great job.
But you guys are
That's
wonderful.
all.
It's fun to make it conversational and we can edit it, so, as necessary.
Right?
So what I was wondering, you were talking about the cost and it's so
fun.
high. Is there any way to bring down the cost and make it more, is it because of all the
It's gonna go up, it's gonna,
Several
it's,
years
it's,
ago, I-
your
The
biggest, by
fancy
far your
equipment,
biggest
too.
expense is labor.
Yeah.
labor?
And there's absolutely nothing I can see on the horizon why labor is gonna get any cheaper.
Because it just seems for a lot of people unfeasible, right, to pay
Right.
$10,000 a month. So what is the solution?
Well, you
That's-
have,
is it
you
just like
have
how
developers who are kind of intentionally going for that kind of missing middle. So you have what Hawthorne does, for example, which is at a much lower price point. It's a much more kind of blue collar, modest product.
Yeah. Who was that? Holiday?
Holiday guys,
Yes.
yeah.
Which is
They
Holiday.
were the old holiday guys.
And they do, I mean,
Fortunately, they haven't.
it's a great model. I don't think anybody does it better than Hawthorne.
Yeah, no, I think they do a good job too, and they have, they, you know, they replicate their, if you walk, when you walk into
Yeah,
it,
they call
it's
it-
like anywhere else.
But they're not the same markets as
Thank you so much.
No.
Newport Beach.
They're in
Cisco.
tertiary markets.
I don't know, they're
Are
in
they? Are they
La
certain
Quinta, they're in,
Well, look,
they're
you
in
look at the demographics of La Quinta though, and it's not good.
El Dorado Hills, up by, you know, next to Folsom.
Yeah.
I was at the El Dorado Hills Hawthorne facility. In fact, I was up doing an independent living lake project up there. And I came into the lobby and they're on the phone. And I'm standing there and, you know, no one's paying any attention to me. This is the marketing office and the general office.
Right.
Zero attention. I'm thinking, don't I look like I have a mom who could be in assisted living? I mean, I don't pretend to be shopping, but I look like I'm a shopper. So finally, the woman came out. She says, I'm really sorry. She says, we're having kind of a crisis. It was their assisted living facility that burned down and the
Oh, and
pyramid.
the campfire?
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
so they were, in fact, they had sent their maintenance guy and other people, they had driven their cars down there.
Oh,
They'd sent
gosh.
their bus to bring them up, you know, they were dispersing.
Yeah.
No one died
A
at
friend, a good
Paradise.
friend of mine, the tennis pro at Meadowood, his dad lived at Santa Rosa,
Mhm.
Brush Creek.
Do they evacuate?
Yeah,
Yeah.
evacuated the entire building.
And we were so lucky we never had a catastrophe
No.
for, I mean, all the
people, what can go wrong?
Oh, yeah.
all the
right?
stuff that can go wrong.
Yeah, it
Right,
can.
it's
Yeah.
terribly frightening, and, you know, at the Paradise fire with the Hawthorne facility there, you know, they'd had plans, emergency plans, evacuation plans, but there was no way to do any of it. The police, you know,
trash.
the
The roads
fire
were
captain,
closed.
he came and he says, go, 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 go! So they're
Yeah.
like, put this person in the car, drive
Yeah.
wherever
Yeah.
you could go, wherever the roads are clear. I mean, it was a nightmare.
How about the Sunrise guys in Houston?
Yeah.
They did
That was
everything, they
horrible.
did everything right.
Right,
They followed
Bus.
and the
Right.
bus catches on fire.
right, that was awful, that was
It
dreadful,
was, yeah.
just
So it's a
dreadful.
lot of
You're
liability,
still breaking this.
right?
All right.
Sounds
Huge.
like the operational part is the big,
Oh,
seems like the
professional
big portion,
liability,
right?
yeah.
It's, you know, if something happens, it's an accident or someone just passes away because they're
Edits that we
90 years
discussed.
old.
So take
And
this with you and see
oftentimes,
if there's anything
somebody in the
else.
family
There is
is
one little hole here,
upset.
'cause I couldn't
Yeah.
read
Upset to the
right
point where
in,
they
Well,
want
they
to
could-
blame it on
Three
somebody.
transactions.
when they go to
Public
the
healthcare
lawyer,
REIT
right,
and
and then
private
it becomes
company.
like,
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
and they're like, okay, it's your fault that,
you didn't do this,
and
or
oftentimes
you
if
didn't.
someone had to go out and moves out because they're too frail, you
Right.
know, they go to the hospital or they go to the nursing home and they pass away 6 months later, or they want to come back into our facility and we say no,
At the end.
and they die and then they blame us,
Right.
it's our fault. Their
No.
family
I'll
member
look
passed
it up.
Yeah,
away.
because there's so
We'll find
many
out.
emotions attached to the whole thing.
And I get it,
It's not
but it's just, yeah,
it's,
but it's
I think that,
unfortunate.
those were the biggies, thank you.